Okay, on this week's episode of the podcast, I'm going to be giving you an overview of winter training essentials, how you can set up yourself for the best winter of training that you've ever had. So you end the winter fitter, stronger, and really ready to step into the phase of your training where for 70.3 and Ironman, you're going to be getting those longer endurance sessions done. Before we can do all of that work next summer, leading up to your races, we have to spend our time focused during the winter to really build foundations of your fitness. So you've got something to build that Ironman or 70.3 on top of next spring and next summer. So this episode is going to be focusing on 6 or 7 things that I think is really essential. So for our athletes who we work with and we coach, this is going to give you an overview and the hows and the whys of how we're going to approach winter training. For those of you who are casual viewers on YouTube, or you might be people who've listened to the podcast for a while, we're going to give you an overview of how we structure winter training and give you some ideas of what you can do to change the way that you've trained in the past to really help you make some more difference and essentially make the most use of the limited training time that you've got. There's nothing worse when I talk with an athlete and they tell me the sort of things that they're doing, and I think to myself, well, there's lots of hours in there, but I'm not sure that very many of those hours are doing anything really substantial to increase their fitness in a meaningful way that's going to make anything different for next season than it was this year. So all of our training is focused around that. So that's the caveat, really. This episode might not be for everybody. There are people out there who are happy to, spend lots of hours training and not really have a purpose or specific reason for doing it. I'm not saying don't do that. People enjoy doing loads of long hours on the bike in the wintertime and get a certain sense of satisfaction from it. That's absolutely fine. But the approach we tend to take is quite different from a lot of people in the industry, which is we only work with age groupers. We only work with people who generally have extremely limited training time and need to make the most of it. They tend to be busy professionals and they tend to be people who have families as well. So I'm not coaching professional athletes and young athletes who have hundreds of hours to train every week. It's all about making the maximum use of the time athletes have got for the biggest bang for the buck, essentially. So here's how we would go about it. First up, directly for our athletes. As I'm recording this, we're going to be going into test week for the vast majority of athletes. We'll be moving into our winter block this week or maybe next week. Athletes are going to spend the first week of that block doing bench line tests. So we know where an athlete is in swim, bike, and run, and to a certain extent in strength as well. But we're going to bench line these numbers, not so that we have a number to aim for on the wall. It's not about trying to smash your previous numbers out of that park, although that does happen for a lot of athletes. The reason for bench line testing is so we know what the accurate levels are right now. It's all about not wasting your training time. And unfortunately, this isn't a very popular thing to say, but it is true. Just putting out a hero session for the sake of it is essentially wasted time. If you're doing something really hard, great, you get bragging rights, great, your mates might give you a lot of likes on Strava. But if there's not a specific reason for doing it, I personally don't see the reason in doing it in the first place. So we'll do tests in cycling, in swimming, in running. We've got our baseline tests, and from those, we will set specific values for bike power and heart rate, for run pace and heart rate, and for swim pace. And we will do all of our sessions relative to those numbers. Doesn't mean you're going to be at those numbers that you've tested at, but we've got certain paces and powers that we want you to train at and certain percentages of those that we've proved over time is going to give athletes the fastest increase in their fitness for the minimal input, essentially. That's a really good way to think of it, actually. It's the minimum input for the maximum output in terms of training effort that you put in to the results of the fitness that you get out at the end of it. So first up on the bike, we'll do a simple FTP test. I want my athletes to do the 20-minute test. I don't like any of the shorter tests. I know there's a tendency toward that on various online training platforms. And there's arguments for and against all of that. Just we stick with what we know. The 20-minute test is already a shortened version of the gold standard, which is a 60-minute test. The reason, honestly, that I don't use a 60-minute test is I would have no athletes because nobody wants to do them. But the best way to test your FTP is to do a 60-minute long time trial. The second best way to do it is a 20-minute time trial that you take 95% of the power value at the end of that. You can see as you work your way down, if you then go to a 12-minute test that you take a smaller percentage of, or a 7-minute test, or a 4-minute ramp, the further away you get from that 60-minute solid state test, the more chance I think we introduce for errors in with that. So I've always worked on the 20-minute test. I don't have any plans to change that in the near future. So on the basis of our 20-minute FTP test, we will then be able to set really specific values that we want our athletes to train at going across the winter. And we can guarantee that 2 specific interval training sessions a week backed up by a longer ride is the best, most time efficient way to increase your bike power and overall aerobic fitness as we go forward. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the halo effect of how your bike power seems to spread over into your run fitness as well, but we'll get to that in a minute. For testing on the swim, we're going to use the Swim Smooth CSS test. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's fine. You can go away and Google it if you're not one of our athletes. It's essentially a 400-meter time trial and a 200-meter time trial with a short recovery break in between the two of them. And the relative difference in between those two values will help determine your CSS pace or your critical swim speed. Again, it's kind of analogous to the FTP on the bike or threshold on the run. It's the pace that you can swim for about 30 minutes at in a race situation. A really rough rule of thumb for athletes here, actually, it can make this really simple for a lot of people, is if you take your 400-meter time, you break it down into a per 100 chunk, and you add 4 seconds onto that per 100, that's a really good finger in the air for what your swim CSS is going to be. So someone who's swimming 8 minutes, that's 2 minutes per 100. Your CSS pace is going to come out at about 2 minutes 4 per 100. That's a real rough rule of thumb. So that gives you an idea of what your CSS pace will be. Now, that's not to say we'll have athletes swim at CSS pace all the way through the winter for their intervals. We won't do. There'll be a real mix of different sessions at different paces, but it's really good to have a number to relate something back to, and then hence that you can see progress along the way. And then in terms of running, how do we set run paces? Well, there's 2 answers to this. The best way to set your run pace is off the basis of a recent standalone running race. So not something that you've done actually in a triathlon, but a flat out 10K, a flat out 5K, a half marathon, nothing longer than that ideally. It tends to skew the results too much. But using the Jack Daniels V.Run formula, we can then work out very specific paces that we want you to run at. And largely this then comes down to stopping an athlete running too hard, too often during the winter, and having faith that we're going to build the top end of our fitness on the bike, and that's going to bleed over onto our run. Okay, so I use a run test with our athletes that is a sub-maximal run test. I won't go into the full details here, but the purpose of it is we do a sub-maximal run test to reduce the risk of injury and from athletes running too hard when they're perhaps not fully prepared. They can then repeat that test every 8 weeks, and what we'll see is either the average heart rate across the test comes down, or for the same heart rate, an athlete's running faster. And it gives an athlete who isn't doing very much or any hard running during the winter, gives them a way to see that they're making progress and reassures athletes that actually, yeah, we are moving in the right direction. Run fitness is increasing, but we don't have to feel we need to go out and do a flat out 5K every weekend and test for the sake of testing. Okay? Now, I mentioned before the FTP run halo effect that we like to talk about. We've seen it over the past 10 years of working with athletes in Team OA. If we get the winter build correct on the bike, your run fitness will also massively increase without you having to do hard intervals on the run. It's a really hard idea for a lot of athletes who've come from a running background to let go of, is to let go of the idea of doing lots of hard run intervals during the winter. Because what I'm trying to do is limit the risk of injury, limit the risk of soreness, and make sure that the fatigue that you feel is fatigue created in the best possible way. And that's not run intervals for an athlete, for a triathlete, definitely not for 70.3 or an Ironman distance athlete. So we will have a very real effect of increasing run fitness across the winter, even though almost all of our running is going to be very steady state, easy pace running all through the winter. Again, depends on the athlete's doing it the right way and having the right specific intervals, athletes who are coached by us, we can 100% guarantee that. Guys who are not, well, it's a little bit harder, but if all you do is limit the amount of times you put yourself at risk from a run injury during the winter, thumbs up and you're on the right path. Now, all of that steady running is not wasted time. It's not junk miles. It's very specific and for a reason. And I want you to think of it like this. The strength of your running muscles, your ligaments, your tendons in your feet, your ankles, your knees, your hips, all of those gets improved and increased by frequent running. It doesn't get increased by you going hard. So we're going to build durability in the best possible way, and that's going to be with easy running. Allow the hard bike intervals to take care of your aerobic fitness. The thing that's limiting any athlete at the even to the very highest level, possibly with the exception of the very top pros, nobody is limited in an Ironman or a 70.3 by their run fitness. They're limited by how much of their run fitness they can access on race day, depending on bike fitness and bike pacing on race day. But the durability aspect, to be able to keep going when you're tired, is the absolute key to turning out a good run performance, not your 5K time. Now, there is going to be a correlation, and every time I say this, people pop up in the comments and say, you're talking nonsense. Of course, if I become a faster 5K runner, of course I'm going to be better at this in a triathlon. And while that's true in theory, people would be amazed how often that isn't true in practice. Yes, you're a faster runner, but no, very often people don't get to see that on race day. And so I'm going to take a step back, look at the big picture, coach a triathlete like a triathlete, and approach the triathlon like an event, not as swim, bike, run individual events. And we'll coach you in a way where your overall fitness increases in the most sensible way. Now, on that, coaching swimming through the winter, again, most triathletes are not limited by their fitness in terms of how fast they can go in the pool. They're limited by their ability to apply force to the water and essentially limited by their technique. Okay? Just like if you go to a golf course and you see people swinging golf clubs, people are pretty much swinging the golf club at the same speed, but this guy over here is hitting the driver 350 yards and this guy over here is hitting it 100 yards. It's not to do with the club speed. It's to do with application of that technique in a very specific way. And swimming is just the same. Most people from a running or swimming background are already really aerobically fit. We don't have to worry so much about that, but they're really struggling to turn that into a swim pool time. Changing your technique and working on drills that will specifically address your technique limiters is the fastest way to improve your swimming. Okay, so the way we'll approach this is we've got a very specific set of swim drills we'll work through. We'll identify the swim drills that work for you in improving your swim limiter or reducing the amount of drag you're creating in the pool is another way to think of it. Once we've done that, that specific drill will do its job and will change your technique, will allow you to apply more force to the water and therefore move through the water faster for essentially the same aerobic cost. So very often it's not about improving an athlete's, you want to think of it as swim fitness, as in how hard it is on your breathing. It's not that that's limiting athletes. It's being able to grip the water and make sure that that stroke is efficient and make sure that you're not slipping your hand through the water for a really inefficient stroke. A really great tip for athletes here is to get a video swim analysis done during the winter and clearly see under the water what's going on, and then you can address that. We'll work on strength conditioning all the way through our winter block as well. So we'll make sure that the strength conditioning we do is a little S and a big C, if you like. It's all about conditioning to help you swim, bike, and run. It's not about lifting huge amounts of weight in the gym, although for some athletes that is more important, and we'll talk about those athletes later. For everybody, what's important is we do enough conditioning work that our swimming, our biking, and our running are not going to put us at a risk of injury. So typically for our athletes, the shortest conditioning session is going to be just a few minutes long, and it's going to involve working on core strength and stability, and it's going to be working on glute activation and hamstring activation so that we don't pick up soreness as we try to run or bike tired and fatigued the back end of our sessions. We're going to make sure we track heart rate variability every day. All of our athletes the heart rate variability guides, what they do every day. If you've never seen the app HRV for training, go and check that out. It's a whole other podcast episode. But our HRV guidance allows us to make sure we're not wasting any training effort. We don't do really hard intervals on the days when our HRV says you're not ready to absorb it. We can adjust our training so that we can make best use of your plan. But the HRV guidance is going to tell you whether your body is under too much stress right now for you to absorb any meaningful training load. Because if, all stress is stress to your body systems. If you're under stress at work or at home, or you've got a big deadline at work, or you haven't slept, or you've drunk loads of alcohol last night, all of these are stressors. In fact, even drinking a small amount of alcohol really shows up on an HRV tracker. Those things reduce your capacity to absorb training, and specifically the higher intensity training. And what studies with HRV guided training showed were that the athletes who simply omitted a hard training session on a day when they weren't going to be able to absorb it, they didn't have to replace it later in the week. Just omitting it on that day and doing steady training meant they made more progress across a block compared to athletes who ignored the HRV training guidance and did the hard training anyway. And that means, in simple terms, that if you train hard on a day when your body isn't able to absorb it, you may as well not have bothered doing that training at all. You may as well just have done the easy session, and you would make more progress doing that way. I mean, who knew, right? Listening to your body actually has a really beneficial effect on the amount of progress that you make. And lastly, the thing to think about during winter for everybody, especially in the run-up to Christmas, is nutrition planning. It's to think about the foods that you're eating on a day-by-day basis. And I'm not talking here about sports nutrition, whether you eat gels or drinks during your sessions. I'm talking about your breakfast, lunch, dinners, and snacks, what you eat and when, and making sure it is of as high quality calories as is possible according to your budget. This is the building blocks that your body is going to use to rebuild and fuel your body. So athletes that we coach, we've got the complete nutritional meal planner guide to go with each of the training blocks that's downloadable into Training Peaks. Each of those have got breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, meal plans for each of those to match the day of training. So on a recovery day, the foods are recovery foods. The day before a big endurance ride, it's a higher energy food so you can build your carb stores ready for the next day. They've all been planned by Alan Murchison, the performance chef, who's a Michelin-starred chef and world age group duathlon champion. There's nobody better in the business. He runs his own personalized nutrition coaching company, who I encourage you to look up actually privately. But for our athletes, we get 7 days worth of meal planners to match winter block, 7 days worth of meal planners to match the spring block, and 7 days of meal planners to match your in-season training. That's already done for you. All you have to do is buy the foods from the supermarket, make the meals in the meal planner. You will have the same sort of level of nutritional planning and guidance that Alan provides for Olympic athletes like Gwen Jorgensen. So check those out. So listen, that's the overview of the winter block. For the athletes who are with us, I hope that gives you a ton of information and context for why we're going to do what we're about to do. And I wish you all the best with your testing this week or next week, whenever that falls. For athletes who are not coached by us, there's 5 or 6 real gems of information in there. Even if you only take one of them to apply to your training, I mean, ideally take all 6, but if you only apply one of them to your training, I can guarantee you're going to be moving in the right direction. And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Here are some discount codes and deals for you. At precisionfuelandhydration.com, you can use the code OXYGEN24 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. You can use their free fuel and hydration planning tool to receive a personalized strategy for your next race. The planner will help you understand your own carbohydrate, electrolyte, and fluid needs so you can refine your strategy during training. And don't forget, you can also book a free one-to-one video consultation with PF&H's athlete support team, and they'll be happy to help you nail your race nutrition plan and help you perform at your best come race day. And over at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive triathlon coaching program for busy age groupers. If you're looking for high quality proven coaching for Ironman or 70.3 triathlon this year, you can check out the details of our coaching packages on our website. And the big news from this week onwards is Team Oxygen Addict is open again for new members. So if you're interested, there's a link in the show notes to book a membership call with us and see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team. If you've already joined our waiting list during the summer, then we'll be getting in contact with you to offer you the chance to book a membership call first. But act fast, guys. We would love to have you be part of our team going forwards and help you reach your triathlon goals for next year. So remember, there's links in the show notes so you don't have to remember them. And until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast.